What's up, Colorado? So on this show, we talk a lot about house hacking. What we do not talk a lot about is house hacking with your adult children. So I know we have a lot of investors who are in a phase in their life where they've got kids in their 20s. They have capital, they have a high net worth, and actually helping your kids get into house hacking can be a true win-win. So I got two great experts in the studio with me today to actually break it down. The first is Steve Medina, who has done this with his children. He's got some great stories, some great tips. What's up, Steve?
Hey, happy to be here and ready to go.
Oh, I know. It's going to be a great podcast. And we got Troy Howell with NOVA Home Loans come talk to us about lending, because it does get a little complex with putting different people on the loan.
Yep.
Good morning, Troy.
Good morning.
All right. So house hacking with children. Steve, let's give a little background, because I think you have done... One. Okay. So you've done one.
And it's kind of like when you have kids, sometimes after the first one, you're not sure you're going to have more, but I think we've figured out how to do it. And so that's why we have 3 kids. And so we'll have more house hacks with them. So.
Good. So I need some perspective here. You're helping your kids buy houses. I'm still paying for preschool right now. So I have a different type of mortgage payment, right? Which I think, we got listeners all across the board on here. But, from a high level, why would you house hack with your adult children?
Well, the thing for me is I found kind of this process where the low down payment and kind of easy entry into, and we bought new builds, give us the greatest return on equity. So we could get low down. I wasn't as worried about the cash flow, which that's been something that everybody seems to get around on first does. But once you can only get those once per year. So my wife and I did a couple of those. And I thought, well, gosh, I have children that are over 18 that have good fundamentals. They're pretty good, young adults. You kind of stop calling them kids at some point, or they want you to stop doing that. But why couldn't I do more with them? So we actually got a little ambitious, and we did one nomad, and we did one house hack with our son, all at the same time. So we bought 2 houses so we could actually accelerate our ability to buy houses and have larger, loans to value and make the return on equity even more powerful for us. So that's where we're kind of seeing things for us. And I go, especially as the market's changed, we have to figure out what the market's given us. And that's one of the few places that is still got an opportunity. And with our kids, because they're going to have rent. They're young college graduates out there in the world. They're going to pay money someplace. Let's have it go to work for them and for us.
So Troy, you specialize, and you've been lending for, I think, almost 30 years now, and you do a lot of loans for investors and house hackers. I mean, you've done a lot of house hacking loans for our Envision clients. From a high level, how common is it for parents to help their kids house hack?
I would say a fair amount. I've had a fair amount of folks over the years do that, and it's
you
like
see
what
any
you're
trends
talking
in
about,
it?
Steve.
Is it changed? Because it feels like I saw that Redfin, the article the other day, and saying people under 30 are getting some sort of help with their family. Now that doesn't mean they're necessarily house hacking, but are you seeing a different change in that now?
Yeah, I mean, with rates being elevated, having the cosigner come in, sometimes it's just the young adults, hey, they want to buy their first house and they can't quite qualify on their own. So bringing the parents in to help them qualify is a lot of what you're seeing as a cosigner on the loan. So it kind of raises their qualifying ability and their purchase price point.
Right.
Comes up nicely as long as they're good cosigners. What I always tell people is a good cosigner is somebody with low debt load. You don't want somebody co-signing with you that's maxed out. They also need to have...
Is that the parent or the child?
Either.
Well, we broke one of those rules, but the kid was okay.
Right. So it's just bringing in a good co-signer, and then your purchasing power goes up significantly. So if the parents are coming in to co-sign and they have a heavy load of debt, they may not work out the greatest, or they have credit scores that are a little soft or a little beat up. That's not always the best, but it can work out awesome for everybody involved to get to that next level, to get into that property and start building some equity.
Now, there's a couple different ways. Again, I've not done this, but I could see, parents just gifting the down payment to the child, and the child goes out there and gets a loan. Or you guys have mentioned co-signing, which is hey, that means the parent is co-signing the loan, and I presume has to be on title as well.
Not always.
Not
Do they
always.
have to be?
Okay.
They can just be on the loan.
Okay, so
and
let's
not
talk
on the
about through
title.
those because I know Steve, you went through this.
Yeah, let me.
You're
maybe I'll explain mine.
Yeah,
and then we'll see where there's deviations that you could potentially, because we chose one way. It doesn't mean it's the only way. So,
Sure.
walk us through that, and also like your thought process, because you're very good at like you research all angles, then you play devil's advocate and say, hey, here's the best option. Here's why.
Yeah. So I got into real estate because I felt like it was a way to diversify, our investments, that leverage was a magnificent thing if done correctly, and that it could set up, I guess, income or wealth building without me having to be actively, which I know it's not truly passive, but as minimally active as possible. So I started looking at that and I go, you know what? If it makes sense for me, I don't know what is all going on in the market, and it's really gotten kind of crazy over the last few years or a couple years. But how do I prepare my children? Because, there's a standard way they're doing things. And if I just let them roll off into college and kind of do the traditional thing, that's what I did. And I realized later on, much later on, that there were other ways. Why don't I start working on them now to say, you know what, get your main job, get a good income, but then here's some things that augment. And that way, when these things come back to you, you could be at 50 and going, holy mackerel, I did stuff way before my dad or way before my parents. So that's what I went in with and said, okay, well, my kids are, at the time, they were 21, 20 and 18. And I started buying rentals and doing that. And then I realized, well, gosh, why wouldn't I do something with them? But what I tried to think about is, how do I train them in this? How do I treat it like a business? And that's where it became different. I could have gifted them, because you could probably walk us through the gifting, but I think you can give, a husband and wife, and you can get in-laws and grandparents and stuff. It's like $15,000. Well, you can get up to $30,000 to $60,000 fairly fast if everybody's kicking in. That doesn't necessarily train the young person. It gives them a leg up, and that's great. But I wanted to create a business out of it. And so we talked to my son, who was 23 at the time, and we just said, hey, why don't you move home? He was renting an apartment. It was in the summer. Move home for about 7-8 months. We'll buy a house. We'll create a partnership. And that's exactly what we did.
What was his initial reaction to this? Because I'm assuming he's probably seen you invest over the years, so he kind of knows what's going on. Or
you know what? I honestly, I think they don't always see exactly what's going on, because even think about some of your friends, what they've got going on. You kind of have an idea of what they're doing, but you don't have firsthand knowledge of it. So they go, oh yeah, dad's doing this or dad's doing that. So you hear things. And when you're 18 to 21 or 23, sometimes, you're into your friends, responsibility, you're still getting used to having it, right? You just went through college. And so that's where your first big responsible. You had to wake your own self up. You had to get your own grades. And if you got bad grades, it's on you. It wasn't like mom and dad didn't tell me in middle grade to get my book. So I believe it's a good natural step in the progression of responsibility, but I also don't want my kids to be all stressed out at 22 going, oh my God, I've got this business and I've got to do this. I want them to be able to have some fun along the way. So I try to make it fun. And imbue, articles and things like that to them. I'd send them emails or I'd send them texts on stuff. And I know a lot of times it was just, yeah, it's dad. Yeah, it's dad. Because what happens as a parent is you spend 20 years trying to help guide them. And at some point they go, oh, it's dad preaching again, or it's dad, this. So I felt like if we set up a business and said, son, we're going to buy a $500,000 business, and we're going to leverage it like this. And being a marketing and finance kid from CSU, or young guy, he goes, okay, I get that. And so I think it starts. And then we did a few more things because it was father and son conversations. And where it wasn't working is when I'd say, hey, you got to get this or you got to get this. I'm thinking more as, I guess, a field general and kind of making sure stuff gets done. And he's like, it's like dad telling me take out the trash, or I got to mow the lawn, or I got to go get this done. So one morning, I decided, why don't I put it in a way that works better for him? So I wrote up an agenda. I jokingly got ties out for us. We're just wearing t-shirts in the morning talking. And I said, okay, every Saturday morning, we're going to have a discussion about where we're at with the lender, where we're at with buying the property, where your credit's at, where some of these things are at. It doesn't mean we're going to spend all week talking about it, but we'll pick a very fine-tuned spot to have those conversations, and then you can be done with it. It's not like, well, we're going to talk Thursday night at 7:00 or this. So once we started doing that, it made it a lot easier for them, because I said, it's like the business you're in. Just one more meeting. We go through some stuff and we get through this.
So did you see this mental shift with your son when you kind of did that? Because, I've gone through different phases, obviously not with my adult children, but just when you've, changed, like say, hey, dress up, or you change the setting, or you formalize things, a lot of times helps kind of like have a mental shift to be in a better like game mindset. Did that help like your son get focused more, or does it help you and him communicate better and treat it more like a $500,000 business?
Yeah, I didn't see any one big change, but it was kind of a gradual change. One of the things that we did early on was I've been very, I've been very protective about our credit. And that's something that I make sure that, we have no debt. The Dave Ramsey stuff outside of his view on debt, good debt versus bad debt, is what I kind of was helping them get through. It was like, you got to protect your credit score. We got them an Experian app, things like that. So they were getting small pieces, and the other two children are watching their older brother, and they're learning along the way. And then they're starting to ask questions, because they go, okay, well, when's my turn? Because you do things when they're in high school, they go, okay, when's my turn? So they're
kind of following along and teed up as well.
Yeah. So, but all of them have great credit scores. They need to get a job, need to have a history. I mean, Troy can, tell you some of the things, maybe that's where, giving people a few ideas about how to make sure their kids' credit scores are, more than just making sure they don't have debt, but what kind of things should they be doing?
Yeah, well, you definitely got to get into the credit score game. That's probably the biggest one, because a parent coming to you with, hey, my son, we want to buy a house together with him, or have him be the primary owner of the property, and they don't have a credit score, that can be a challenge. There are programs you can do without a credit score, but if you're going to do max financing, 5% down, minimum down, having a credit score is a huge thing to have. So starting early, like my son, my youngest, him and I went in on a credit card together, so he can start developing a credit score, and then he can work towards getting his own credit card sooner
and
later.
Why would you go in on the credit card with your child?
Because he just was 18, and they wouldn't let him get his own credit card, and he didn't have a job, right? He was doing some work, but they wouldn't just give him straight up on his own credit card. They'll give you a student loan.
Yeah, you get $200,000 student loan, but you can't get a $400 credit limit.
A credit card. Just
because this allows them to essentially piggyback off of your credit score, right?
Correct. Yep. And then he starts building his own credit score. So we do that a lot with clients that don't even have credit, to get them in a position to obtain financing. Go out and get a secured credit card, even for $300, and you give the bank $300 that they hold as security on the credit card, and then you just lightly use that credit card, and you build a credit score.
That was my first credit card.
6 or 7 months, you'll have a credit score. And if you do it right, you'll have a 720 plus credit score, which puts you right in the thick of it. So
I'm surprised how many people don't have a credit score. I've run into people 30 years old that don't have a credit score.
You've got to play the credit score game, because it wins on so many different levels. It's not just for home financing, but when you go to get a cell phone, they soft check your credit. When you go to get insurance, they check your credit. I mean, so many different levels of credit is looked at for different things. And so having a PUI credit score really hurts you in so many different ways. So you just got to get in there and play the game and play it well. But understanding the game is a big component. So you educating your kids on that, which is the same thing I did on what it takes.
I want to make sure I got these tips right. So one tip is start a new credit card as a joint credit card with your kids.
If they can't get a secured.
Or add them to yours.
Add them to.
That's what I did.
You can do an authorized user.
Yeah.
Will start showing up on their credit report. You want to make
one
sure
or the other, like if you two are my kids, I make you, Troy, an authorized user, and then Steve and I go get a new credit card. Does that does it really make a difference one way or the other?
Yeah, the joint credit card, I would say, is a little bit better than authorized user. But
Okay.
at the end of the day, you're going to generate a credit score. If there's any way they can get one completely on their own, that's probably the best. That's idealistic.
Well,
And
A lot of times
secured
they're
credit
not going-
cards should, I mean, like, really no one gets rejected for those as long as you like
Yeah, you could be it.
put your deposit or you put your $200 or
Yeah.
$500 deposit in, right?
It depends on the institution, but generally speaking, that should be the case.
Okay.
I mean, people will have a significant credit event, and they can go out and get a secured credit card.
Isn't that
Usually
wild?
immediately after, bankruptcy, and then next day go out and get a secured credit card, start building your credit back up.
Wow. Well, and what we did is we had our bank card and we had each one of them because they were all in college at that point. And so that at times it was good because it's, hey, I need books or I need something. And so they could just buy it there versus having to figure that out.
Something, I need beer.
Yeah. There was a few accidental Uber or this
That you
charge
saw
on
that
it.
you're
that you
keeping
go,
an eye on the
you
charges
know,
and saw a
that's,
few things come through that you.
What's Kegs R Us you're going over here to?
Right,
Right.
that's exactly. That's exactly.
The corner liquor store.
Oh, tank of gas that I didn't recognize. But we after that we had them get their own credit card. So when they could, so
As soon
they
as they
had
can.
that, and then they had some jobs while they were in college, and then they, one got a Discover card, another one got a MasterCard, different ones. And so I don't know if there's any ones that are better than others. I mean, does it matter the credit card?
I really don't. Yeah, as long as it's one of the major carriers, Visa, MasterCard,
Yeah.
shy away from American Express.
Why is that? Just
How they kind of come through. Sometimes they are a little more difficult.
Okay.
I just think that
You mean
Visa,
to work with or on the credit score?
just to work with for them. American Express is kind of funny how they report some of their information. I have borrowers, experienced, seasoned, older borrowers, and they'll show balance paid. They may have like a $15,000 American Express balance, and it'll show up as having to pay the full balance. And so it kind of screws things up when we do our ratio calculation.
Right.
And there's even some cases where it's like, yeah, can you have that paid off for us? So we
Right.
don't, or we have to show that they have money available to pay it off if they weren't going to pay it off, in addition to the funds needed.
Huh.
So it's just a little bit of a different beast. I wouldn't freak out about it too much, but for the kids, I would stick with the Visa and MasterCard.
And I added in making sure I try to gently push things, and sometimes you have to shove things. Sometimes you can push it. Sometimes you can lay it out there and they might pick it up. But there's one of the, I think it's Experian, the Credit Boost app. And I said, get that and just look at what your stuff is. So then they started telling me, here's what our bank tells us our our credit score is. Here's what this tells me. So it starts to get into their mindset. And there are things where I didn't realize, and maybe you could speak a little bit about it, but when we were doing these to apply for the loan, so we were actually getting two loans at once because we were buying the house next door. And when we went to apply with the three of us, my wife and I and my son, our son on it, they use his credit score for the loan. And so ours were actually higher, but they use his. And that's what's also for the PMI. Is that fairly standard? Do all lenders do it that way?
Yeah, it's pretty much when anytime you have multiple borrowers, it's always the middle score of the lowest score of the borrower group.
Okay.
So they're going to use, the middle score out of the three credit reports
For each
of
individual.
the lowest borrower.
So like the three of us went in and bought a second home up in the mountains together. We each get 3 credit scores, and our middle score is what's used.
Okay.
And whoever has the lowest credit score of the 3 of us is what, just to your point, everything's based off of. The pricing for the loan, the mortgage insurance for the loan. So
it really is the weakest link in the chain.
Precisely.
Okay.
Well said.
So is there a way, and I might be jumping ahead of you here, Steve, but does the child always have to be on the loan, or are there other ways, sometimes it's parents, sometimes it's parent and kid, sometimes it's just kid? How different ways people structure it, or, for lack of better words, game the system, or play the game of the system?
Loan hack it.
Yeah, loan hack it. There we go.
Loan hack. It's a loan hack. The kid being the owner occupant gets you to that higher loan to value, that minimum down payment, like you were talking about, Steve, when you can do 3.5% with an FHA, owner occupied.
But they have to be on the loan then.
But they've got to be on the loan.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
We could, if I recall, we couldn't get the first time buyer because it was my wife and I and our son. So he may have been a first time buyer, but we couldn't access that program.
What can kick you out of that is you could probably do the 3% down Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac first time home buyer. But if your income levels exceed the median income, then that'll knock you out
it out.
potentially.
Okay.
And that will include mom and dad's.
Yeah, especially when you're
Income.
talking like Home Ready and Home Possible
Okay.
programs, those get sensitive to the income levels of pushing you out of that
Okay.
3% down. But you can still do the 5% down, which is I think what you did.
Yeah.
With those.
Yeah, we
deals.
just did 5% down, which
Okay.
is
Still works out great.
Yeah.
All right. So far, 2 big key steps. Prepare the kid mentally, have the business plan discussions and put some formality around it. And then as soon as possible, start making sure your kid is building credit either jointly or help them walk through to make sure they get a secured credit card or starter card.
Yeah. And I think that's just a great life. You're sending them to college, and part of life as an adult is living with these credit scores, and having an optimal credit score just benefits so many different ways.
Now, there's no way for either buying a home or getting a credit score or credit card until you're 18 or older, right? Doesn't the kid have to be 18, or I guess an adult at that standpoint to be 18 to legally sign a contract?
Yeah, I think that is the case.
Okay.
There may be some crazy emancipated minor kind of thing, but that's probably...
Can a 16-year-old have use of a credit card? Can you give
Justin
them a credit
Bieber,
card as an
might have been
user?
emancipated at 16 or something, one of these artists or something like that. But that's not normal.
Okay, and then I want to give a little more context here, because Steve, you live in Northern Colorado, and I know you own quite a few new builds and some of the new build subdivisions up there. So going back to the house you partnered on with your son, can I give high level what part of Colorado it's in, and just the property, and start walking through the details?
Yeah. So again, those are not just any house. We're trying to find ones that will make a good rental, that you can live in for a year, that it could be lightly used, that you can get roommates in, and it should have good appreciation over time. And the debt pay down are the 2 things that I kind of look at, because it's always tough to calculate exactly what you're saving on your taxes, and cash flow is going to be a little bit negative for a while because you have PMI starting off. And so those things kind of factor into where the property's at. And we thought, well, for us, we like the new builds because there's very low maintenance on them for the first few years. You have a warranty in the first year, and then you have other structural warranties and furnace and HVAC and other things that continue on. So they're fairly low cost. That makes it easy for us to get in. I'm not a very handy person. I'm not going to ever be that. So I can go and put some blinds, put in a Nest doorbell, a Nest thermostat, and it's got a little tech to it. They use it for a year, and then somebody else gets a great rental for years on out. I think that's the other piece that is very interesting, is after the year, when your child moves out, think about how the last year really impacted you. Do you remember where you're at for all these things? It goes by so fast. So if we can keep doing these, and my kids are in their early 20s, they're going to look back and go, kind of forgot about that, but I get a K1 from, this partnership each year. So I'm learning about taxes. I'm learning about investment. I'm learning about how budgets work. Every quarter I do the books, and I send a balance sheet and a P&L to them to say, here's your investment. And so those things, I think, add to what we're doing and picking the right house and the right neighborhoods. And that, can you be perfect all the time? No, but if you can optimize it, it sure as heck makes it better for them over the long run.
So you bought the house with your son in Windsor, Colorado, right?
Yep.
And it was just about a year ago now at this point?
It was a little over a year ago.
Over a year ago.
May of 2022.
Okay. And kind of you put down 5%.
5%.
And then did that money come from you or your son?
Yep, from me.
Came from
my
you?
wife and I.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
Whenever I say me, anybody, it's my wife. She's the boss, and I just do what I'm told. So
I totally get it. Yeah. So you and your wife, you put down the 5%, all the closing costs. Did you basically bring all the cash to invest?
Brought it all.
Okay. And then son, you and wife are all on
the title.
On title. Is this
tenants and
tenants in common and joint tenancy?
Joint tenants.
Now, in terms of loan hacking or just loan structuring, Troy, does it matter if it's a tenants in common, a joint tenancy? And kind of walk us through what that looks like.
Yeah. From our perspective, we don't care whether it's tenants in common or joint tenancy. That's going to be from the legal side and from estate planning side of everything. And you can go into that, but joint tenancy real quick, right of survivorship, right? If
one goes, the other two get it.
They automatically get it, right?
Last man standing kind of thing.
All right, let's have a Western shootout here to get the house.
Right?
Huh?
Yeah. So
if there's an extra person lurking around Halloween and it's him, I know that I might be giving up my share pretty soon.
And he's feeding you some interesting candies.
Yeah.
And then common is that each person gets their portion, right? So a little bit on the real estate side. So each of you are equally 1/3 if you did a common. But from a lending standpoint, we don't care.
Okay, you don't care.
It's just however you write the contract.
Yep.
And then, or if you post-close, you want to change the title, you could always do a title change.
So investors, obviously, make sure you Google that and talk with someone, help kind of figure out the pros and cons, because there are some nuanced differences, and they have their pros and cons for joint tenancy and tenants in common.
Yeah.
And so you did joint tenancy?
We ended up doing joint tenancy.
Okay.
And the reason we did it is we actually, after the fact, so after he moved out, we moved the property into the name of an LLC, and then we did an operating agreement, and then it has splits for my wife and I and for my son. Mm-hmm. And so those, at least in my mind, they don't supersede, but they augment what we have already, so that it overrides that current ownership that we have it in. So that would then now be owned by the LLC. So when we sell it in 10 years or roll it over to something else in 1031, that's the process. So I didn't worry as much about the joint tenancy because we were planning on taking this to a partnership. So that was the plan from day one, is buy the property, live in it for a year, move out or get roommates along the way, defray the cost for that year, get it into a rental, put it into an LLC, and do a partnership agreement with that child.
I like the fact that you got everything written out and understood so that there's no misunderstanding, because years will go by. Mm-hmm. And then you don't have any of the back and forth that it could occur where it's like, well, I thought it was supposed to be this way, or I thought it was supposed to be that way. You've got it spelled out so everybody's on the same page, on board together. So you want this to be a positive. A lot of times parents will go into different relationship agreements with their kids with the best of intentions, and then it's a nightmare. And then Thanksgiving dinner doesn't taste the same when you all sit down together.
When you have some of it on your face because somebody's angry and threw it.
Right. So you don't want that type of situation. Personal experience, my mom and stepdad tried to do some things to help out family, and it just came back to haunt them. And the best of intentions were out there to start off with, but it ended up being a major family strife. So I really like, Steve, the fact that you've got things understood and agreed upon and in writing with your son, so that you guys are all on the same page. And because it's a great thing for him to build wealth and for his future. So you don't want it to be a problem. You don't want it to be the reverse. And
we have a fairly tight knit family that we all kind of get along. But that can fall apart. Because now that the situation is different. If I go to do something different, say my other son and my daughter, are ready, and they say, well, we'll do it together. Well, that is a different operating agreement, a different structure, a different funding model. Maybe they just get one roommate. And so we've been thinking about that too, because it's tricky out there right now. And so trying to get something, can we get something that has enough bedrooms, enough bathrooms that they can get roommates, and then it still is a good rental on the other side? And can you kind of manage a little bit of the net negative cash flow for that? So with my son, this was truly turnkey. Yeah. It's, you move out. We did it to the letter of the law and regulations. And, right now we were able to get the rent to cover all of the actual payment. The only thing it doesn't cover is the property manager. Mm-hmm. So roughly when the PMI ends, we should have enough increase in rent that it will have positive cash flow. But, we bought a $500,000 business for $25,000.
Yeah, and you got to keep your estate planning in mind too, and that's part of what you've done with this, between the operating agreement, how you've titled the property. You want to leave the kids with something good and positive, right, from your estate standing standpoint, your estate planning standpoint. So I think that's awesome. That's
And there were some funny things along the way that you don't realize. I mean, having people sign, through DocuSign, other things, getting them ready. One of the things that kind of got us in a bit of a tizzy right towards the end, right when we were getting ready to close, is my wife and I went and celebrated our anniversary, and we were over in Europe and having a great time and running up credit cards and having all of that stuff. Well, as soon as we get back, the lender ran the credit check on our son, and I think we had $12,000 or $13,000 worth on it. Well, a guy that's making, 65, 70, that's a pretty big number, and it shows up on his. So it was like, oh my God, it tanked his credit score. So we ran to the bank, and we pay off everything every month, paid it off, and I had to have them draft a letter that said, there's zero, balance on this credit card. And then they did something I had not really heard of, rescoring.
Yeah.
So we handed him a letter, and then they rescored it, and then he was back up.
Yeah. And part of that, that actually brings up a good point that we can talk about real quick here, is that when people do their initial application for a loan, there's a credit check done. When you go into underwriting, there's a credit check done. But
is that a hard one? Is that
they have to do a hard one?
When do they do the hard ones?
Well, when you go to underwriting, they have to have a hard credit pull at some point in time. We can soft check it on the front end, pre-approve you, run it through automated, do everything with a soft check, but there comes a point in time where a hard inquiry has to occur. But on top of that, and this might be what kind of caught you, is it's a requirement within the lending industry. They have to do another check on your credit prior to close to make sure you didn't slip something in there, like a
new
quick car payment,
or a trip to Europe,
or you're buying another house or something like that, and then all of a sudden you got this additional payment that's going to throw your ratios off, or in your case, tank out the credit score. Usually it's the kids that are killing the credit score, but the parents did it on this one. So, but the good news is you got it cleaned up quickly, and they had the ability to rescore it, which is awesome.
It's surprising how many little places there are to trip up. And I remember going into, I think it was Shields, and we were going to buy something, and they offer you a credit card, and you get a big discount on it, and that. And the first thing you do is, if you're in this business, is like, no, it's like, the Antichrist. You can't do that, because that will come back to bite you. But a lot of people are like, oh yeah, they don't associate those two, and they go, oh yeah, that'd be good because I get like 15% off. Well, they don't realize that connected and dinged them, and that window just has to be sacred. Which I didn't think my trip and then paying it off the way it timed when they ran that second hard pull, that it didn't cause any damage. It just caused a little panic.
Now I want to highlight something here. Like, this always brings up a great point to like why you want to have like a great lender on your team. Someone like you, Troy, and at Nova Home Loans, because it's not just, hey, you're a lender, but you understand the nuances. 100%. And now, while most lenders can do these types of conventional loans, from my experience, a lot don't have the experience and that nuanced knowledge like you do for out there, like helping people navigate it. So, quick shout out, if you guys need an amazing lender, talk to Troy. He has helped, I think, over 100 of our clients now and different podcast listeners, and I only have heard 5-star reviews back. So I want to loop back to something here, because I know this will come up in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and get my email template ready for this when these questions come in. You mentioned you put your property in LLC. So, this is one of the top questions we get as real estate investors, as real estate professionals, is, well, why can't I just buy the house in LLC from the get-go? Why is that, Troy?
Because we're doing residential lending. So Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, VA, FHA, they are to individuals. As soon as you go into an LLC, now it's a commercial loan, because you're lending to an entity, not to individuals. And so post-closing, you could change that title, and there's a lot of discussion. That's probably another topic for another day about switching it to the LLC. But generally speaking, it's definitely doable and advisable in a lot of respects from a house hacking standpoint to LLC it. But on the initial front end, you've got to go in as individuals.
Yeah. And I mean, just, I've done that myself, and just some general stuff is, that's something, Troy, cover your ears while we talk about this,
Earmuffs,
right?
Earmuffs.
Is that something, hey, that is something you do post-closing. The lender's not involved, and, that's something you'll do usually a couple months after closing to title it. And yes, there is some chance that it could, cause the due on sale clause.
Well, I've read and seen some of the Fannie and Freddie guidance that there's actually language out there now that says that so long as you're still accountable for the loan, they're not going to do a due on sale. I don't know. I've pulled that language from their websites and have that. So that's where, but I waited a year. I did it above the board, and once we did it, then I said, okay, you're doing this, and so we turned it into a business. I guess there's a lot of people that say, we don't really need that. It's not necessary. We'll just run it and do it that way, and that's fine. The first couple years of rentals, we just had them in our own personal names, and then we decided to kind of change that and structure it because I'm kind of to that process. I want to teach my kids. I want to teach my kids how to run businesses and how that works. And when you're in corporate, you learn how to run different businesses inside a business, but you don't really realize how this stuff works. A lot of people don't run into P&Ls and balance sheets and things like that in a corporate environment unless they happen to be in finance or they might be managing a business unit. But a lot of people don't have that. So I wanted my kids to know that early on. So they go, okay, when I do this, that makes this better or worse. And so they get that early on, not waiting and finding that out the hard way later on.
Sure.
So you're past the 1 year mark with partnering with your son. Is House Hack number 2 partnership on the horizon?
Well, he's thinking about moving over. He's got a good job, and there's different places in the country that is. And now he's 25 and might think about moving. So that's an option for him. Right now is a good time to buy. We're probably going to buy another property in the next 4 months or so.
You and your wife going to buy a rental? Or
we'll move into a house right now.
Oh, you're going to do okay.
Yeah,
cool.
So it will be something that could be a rental, but it might be a little bit higher because right now, the toughest things to sell are, an existing property. People are struggling with those, and something that needs fixing up. Well, guess what? My wife has always wanted to fix one up. So I'm like, well, we're in this for a heck of a ride. Have at, because
she's the boss.
And you know what? Her being the boss, I listen. So,
man, by that next 2 or 3 months, the stuff out there right now and the slow season is like,
that's where, and you can get concessions.
And
help with
costs. That's exactly
before
what's
the
happen.
springtime picks up.
Yep.
If you guys are willing to get a little fixer-upper.
We've got a nice little trip in January that's going to take about 3 weeks, and so it's either going to be before or after that, trying to figure out that. But that's
you got to do it before for timing for that.
Yeah. Well, maybe I go. You know what? We can figure that one out because right now is the best time because stuff's it's aging on the market, and so if we could get our kids into one, because there's some that if we had to go in and fix it up, that's
so this might be kids 2 or 3, not I'm gonna just number them. So not number 1 son, but 2 or 3. Are they at a point where they might be ready for their first house hack?
Not quite. Okay. So our daughter is finishing her last year of college, so she's not quite there. She's had good jobs in college, and they compete with her schools. But we're like, get that done first, then go on. And then our other son, he's just getting into his first job, so it's not quite there. But we're not many months off, so there'll still be some opportunities out there.
So, I'm really curious because this. I'm gonna just kind of fast forward here. So let's just say you go out there and partner with your kids, with a couple more house hacks. What type of, I should say, not what type, is there any negative impact to Steve and Steve's wife's credit or to the kids? Because I remember running into the situation, talking with someone where they had like some partnerships on loans, and I think you kind of get the whole liability counted against you. Like if you and I own the house together, Troy and I, we each are totally liable for the loan, but if rent comes in, we only get to claim 50% of it. I remember there being some type of like potential for kind of getting your income to debt or your debt to income ratio out of whack that way. And if you is that true? And maybe do a better job articulating the situation than what I did.
There's definitely aspects to that you're hitting on. I think the number one thing is if it's rented out, like your son moves on, he goes to buy something else in another state, and you have the house that he's on title to and on the loan with rented out, then from a lending perspective on his number 2 house that he would be purchasing with you or without you, that payment would be offset. So it's like a house hacker buying house number 2 or 3 or 4 in his portfolio. We look at the existing homes, make sure that there's offsetting factors, calculations are done to mitigate that. Now, the other angle on that as well, and this applies to other debts that are co-signed, like on a car loan or anything, if you can document a 12-month history of that person having made the payment, then you can wash that off against the debt to income ratio. So I co-signed for my kid. Yeah, I co-signed for my kid to buy a car. Not that I would want them to do a car loan because we're buying houses, not cars.
Right.
And I co-signed with him, which I wouldn't do, but if say you did, and he made the payments from his account for 12 months, and I go out to buy a house. Now, even though I'm showing up on that loan and it's showing up as a liability, if I need it to help my debt to income ratio, I can get 12 months worth of history showing him making the payment from his account, and then therefore I don't have to count it against me. So same thing would apply for a house. And I've had parents do that with kids, and they never rented the house, but because the kid was making the payments from their own personal account. Now, if it's a joint account, it screws things up.
Okay.
Mom and dad are on an account with their son.
Talking about checking account.
Yeah, like your checking account, and all the payments are pulling from that checking account. From a lending perspective, we can't differentiate whose money's in there. You may try to document and show it, but if it's just the kid's checking account, only in his name, and he's been making all the payments on the co-signed loan from that account, and we can get 12 months history. I don't have to have a rental agreement, but now I don't have to count that debt against the parents when they go to buy their next house.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that is different from my understanding from a couple of years when I was going through some situations talking to people. Okay, so if part of the party is they've had 12 months of documented history paying from their own personal account, and after a year, then that monthly payment won't go against the other party on there as their, okay.
On the co-signed loan.
So
car loan, house loan, things of that nature.
So this is a golden nugget here. So, okay, for people that do that, they should be thinking about from mortgage payment 1, where's that money coming from? Because that will have a big ripple effect for everyone on everything down the road. What do you guys have a joint account, Steve? Or I say joint by but the parents and the son.
No, we don't. But what I did do is, because we at times struggled and didn't have that third roommate, so we would augment and split half of what he was short. So like that third roommate. And so that's where it would have probably caused the problem, because then if we write a check for a few $100s and then he has to put his in, that goes back to that same thing.
Kind of mingled money.
So would that cause that?
Yeah, it would cause a problem from an underwriting standpoint. But if you have a full rental agreement, when he departs that,
then it's a different
departure residence.
Right.
Then
or give cash to your son for those couple of months, right?
But
earmuffs, Troy.
Yeah.
But what I understood from that, and maybe you can validate it, is if we'd have just said, okay, say for instance he couldn't get it for a whole year, and we're going to do $400 a month that you help do that, so that'd be $4,800. If you gave a $4,800 gift to him, and then he paid it the whole way, that wouldn't necessarily be the same thing.
Yeah, but
I mean, I know you'd have to go to somebody that underwrites, but that's what I heard.
Yeah,
if you're doing it every month, it's worse than just saying, here's a.
I think there's a good probability that would work. You know, it's always the devil's in the details, and the details are in the documents. So looking.
That's why I love this stuff, because it's how creative can you be that. It's like playing Monopoly and
it's a game, absolutely,
better than anybody else. And so it's like, hey, there's a way to get this done. It's
and those little things that can trip you up so quick, like you just said about going on your vacation, running up the credit card, and little known to yourself, little did you know that was going to be a heartache or a little extra work that wasn't necessary. Well, and there's enough going on as there was.
Isn't it also true that for the first year, so we have a rental agreement in place with the renters today. And so if we were to, now till the end of the year, have that rental agreement, that would be our proof of funds or proof of income for the rental. After that, it goes to the stated tax return for
Schedule
that
E
LLC.
tax return is what we run the calculations off of.
So those are slightly two different things, but
they can be, and they're looked at together or separate.
And you get 75% of that, right? That's not
25% discount. The Schedule E is a straight up Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac calculation that's ran to determine what that property is doing, whether it's going to be a plus or is going to weigh on your debt to income ratio.
Right.
And then if we're working straight off of any lease type situation, then it's going to be 75% of the face amount. So a $2,000 lease is $1,500 in our world.
Right.
If the payment's $2,000, then that's a $500 hit towards your debt to income ratio.
Right.
And the underwriting on that 25% discount, that's to kind of assume for operating expenses on the property, right? It's a very simple rule of thumb to say 25% will cover operating
it's a very
expenses.
conservative way that underwriting in the lending world looks at it to account for vacancy factor, operating income, expenses, that kind of thing.
What other like I'm so intrigued by the 12-month thing. What other like golden nuggets or tips do you have for like me, Steve, and other listeners?
I'm trying to think. You're putting me
it's
on
not
the spot.
win the lottery. It's
no, don't rob a bank to get money.
That's
a good
no
tip.
Fraud, no making up your own stuff. That's not good.
Well, let's talk about this. I mean, this you talk about fraud, and this, I see this discussion on like Bigger Pockets forums and just around, hey, we could go out there and either with an adult child or someone else. Oh, let's just say we're going to live in that house, so we can do a 5% down, but not actually live in there.
Yeah,
that is mortgage fraud, right?
That is technically mortgage fraud. That's something. That's probably one of the biggest frauds that occurs because the terms for financing are so much more attractive for an owner-occupied deal, whether you're putting 5% down, 20% down, or whatever you're putting down. But owner-occupancy financing is more generous with the ratios. They're more generous with
you get a little better rate.
The rate for sure is significantly better. So that's probably the number one fraud.
What is the penalty? Like how, I guess,
they'll call the loan due.
There's the due on sale.
Yeah, I'm going to say so.
That's just the due.
So a quick nugget. Bad experience that I had years and years ago. I think it was around 2002. I had a gal buy a place and she was going to owner occupy it. She was fine. She was all game for living in the property. She understood that. She still had her existing property, but she was going to live in this property. And long story short, they do check a percentage of loans for occupancy. They'll do whatever. And they'll even go so far as to knock on the door.
I've heard about this.
They'll send somebody out. And if they're not there, they'll investigate it further. And she was making her payments on time. Everything was going great from a loan standpoint. She qualified fine. She was making her payments fine. But because she wasn't occupying as her primary residence, they called the loan due.
And do you have 60? Don't you have 60 days to? Isn't it some
to occupy from
days?
Close?
So if you close on the first of the month, and you you could
your
actually
intent is to occupy within 60 days.
Okay.
Is the general rule of thumb.
And then what? Sorry, what are the other? There's a couple other things that I remember hearing is that if you, move more than 100 miles away. So if you get a job or if you
that's
deploy,
an FHA 100-mile rule. So that's an FHA
that's not unconventional.
Not unconventional.
So if somebody takes out a loan January 1 and then May they get sent a job change and they move to another place.
There's a provision that there's allowances to forego the 100-mile rule with FHA, but there's strict rules on what is allowable.
Okay, so it'd be like military deployment or some other things.
Job transfer, something that was a bit beyond your control. There's definitely some details that allow for that.
So you couldn't buy a place in Fort Collins and then 6 months later,
but it's only
down to Colorado Springs.
We're only talking FHA.
So conventional, there's not. So that's
conventional. There's not.
Okay. I had not heard that it was only that. I haven't tried
only
it.
FHA. In fact, I've got one closing today that is an FHA purchase less than 100 miles. So there wasn't a significant event, but without going into the big details of that particular transaction, it was able to work because of his situation. He's doing a house hack. It's working out awesome for him, but he had rental income that showed up on his Schedule E for 2022 for his current primary because he's doing rent by the room.
Oh.
And that allowed him to do house hack number 2 with an FHA loan. And we did not have to deal with the 100-mile rule because he had rental income on the departure residence.
So tell me about one more thing. Sorry, Chris.
Very much a nuance there, though.
As a house hacker, there's an option of either getting your roommates to pay you rent and you just run it like it doesn't exist, or should you be thinking about running that as claiming that income to be able to help justify getting into the next place?
If you don't show it, won't acknowledge it.
It doesn't exist. If it's not on paper, it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. a lot of client. I mean, I had a guy that was a valet. That this is on the income side. He was making great money as a valet. Didn't declare any of it.
It's all cash, right?
It was a lot of cash. And it's like, we can only go based on what we can document. So it's either through the tax returns or through your W-2s, pay stubs.
I learned that lesson in my young early days of being an entrepreneur. Is I had a very, very low tax liability, which was awesome in the year because I didn't, the way I didn't report all the income, I guess. And then I went to go get something. I was like, oh, you make no income. I was like, well, I do. Like, well, no loan. I was like, oh, damn, that was one of my learning experiences. Yeah, exactly what you said.
But to tie real quick, to tie out, Steve, to what you were saying on the rental side, you've got to document and show it as well.
Okay.
So if you have undocumented rental income and we're not going to see it, then we're not going to be able to give you credit for it. So again, it's a double-edged sword from a house hacking standpoint. You want to deduct and write off as much as you legally can.
That's what I did
within the tax code. But conversely, it's going to hurt you a bit when you come to get your financing because we're going to build based off that. It's like you've talked about with the business. Right. Somebody may say, hey, I've got $100,000 business here. But what they don't say is $50,000 worth of expenses. From our world, lending world, you only make $50,000. It's your taxable income that comes into play. Now with rental properties, Schedule E, we add back in depreciation. We give you some credits back. We don't totally hit you for it from an underwriting perspective, but you got to keep that stuff in mind. So there's reality, and then there's the world of underwriting and how they look at things. So understanding that game, like we were talking about earlier, the credit score game, but understanding the lending aspects of what these things can do to you and the nuances to it, where hopefully I can help you with some of that stuff that can make a big difference to what the next house.
I learned new stuff today, and I just went through it, but it was just my flavor of that one. And that's where I think it's, Chris, you have such a large audience here. You have, people that are my age and older, and you have people that are in their, 20s and 30s trying to figure it out. And whichever one of those groups is trying to figure it out, now they may have another tool in their arsenal to say, okay, I may not have all of what I need, or I'm on that side where, I've got a little bit of extra to be able to help my kids get to that next spot. So one of the two can reach out to the other, and then, if you want to reach out to us and we can help you learn that, but that's where, those two can work together. And a lot of times we don't think about that because we're just in our own little universe, but, our family can be a great source of support and collaboration to build wealth as well. It's just not a single, person. It's, there's a team out there to help.
That's the Envision Advisor team, right?
Yeah.
It's a group and a community, a family of folks that, Chris, you've built out over the years that provides all that help and support and all that information and knowledge. And so many of the house hackers come in and, partake of that. And you have so many tools that you can give them to educate them for them to have a good experience, because there's so many different ways of going about it, but there's also so many different pieces of information that's out there that may not show the whole story. But here in Colorado, we've got a great Envision Advisor team that can really support and help people wherever they're at, whether it's the first house they're doing or if it's the 9th, 10th house they're doing.
Well, thank you for that compliment.
Well,
any questions out there? Steve and I are always happy to chat.
That's truly the case.
Yeah.
One thing, the way you were saying, hey, the kids can go to parents, or you look at that, like, in real estate, OPM, other people's money, is a phrase used a lot. And I see people do that. And it took me a while to realize that in situations where, kids and parents partner together, it's basically OPM. It's the same thing. It's another creative way to come up with money. And the cool thing about house hacking, you can do with parents. We've had quite a few clients that have, it's been two young guys. They've basically been business partners where, hey, one may have the down payment money, one doesn't, but they can partner it together on there. So there's some very creative ways. And also OPM, use other people's money to go out there and get some money, but also get a highly leveraged deal to go out there and put together a great deal with a low down payment.
Yeah. Well, and that's where we see some of these young people that are, fascinated and can see the value in real estate and building wealth through it. They go out and create a business plan and pitch it to family and friends to get their first, kind of syndication if they want to buy a fourplex or that. This isn't really any different, but this is like, how do I put together a proposal to my family to get my first house hack? because that might be their first step in. And if you do them in this way, you'll accelerate your ability to get in it, because if it takes you a long time to get 25,000, that time lost by waiting to get that 25,000 or 30,000 to get into a place is loss of debt pay down, loss of appreciation, loss of tax benefits. If somebody has that, is willing to partner with you in the family, it could be an uncle, it could be those, because that's going to make a huge difference. And you'll learn how to run a business doing it. Do I like doing QuickBooks and some of that stuff? Not particularly, but you know what? It takes me just a couple hours once a quarter. I save off the PDF and send it out. Well, my son is going to learn that stuff because he's out running his business, what he does. And so each kid's going to do that. So there's a lot of parents and family and children out there that can find a way to work together that, won't cause it to be a problem down the road, spelling it all out up front so that they don't have that confusion. I think that's a really important thing.
So if your son's a finance major, right?
Marketing and finance.
Marketing and finance. Shouldn't you give him the privileged learning experience to do the books himself?
Probably should.
The privilege. I love it.
Hey, I mean, I've done books and I hate it. And a couple of years ago, I got a bookkeeper.
Yep.
Man, it's not a lot of time. It was a huge mental relief. Hey, it saved me like 2 units of time, but it saved me 20 units of mental bandwidth, which is just, I can do them, but I hate doing books. But that's part of, don't you have a bookkeeper there you could use?
You know what? Over time, I'd like to see my kids learn how to do that. My wife too, because you know what? I've learned in the last couple of years that when you get to this age, you lose friends and family and things like that. You know what? If you got set aside tomorrow, could your family run without you?
Yeah.
Like what would happen? And that's where estate planning and that stuff, not to go to like a tougher side, but can they run the things? Do they know where all the stuff is at? Because if you've got your regular investments, your maybe syndications, maybe rental properties, that stuff can't stop. It's a running machine, and so somebody has to keep that going. So that's really important for families to kind of know that and have that as well. So not only teaching your 25-year-old or whoever in the family, but having those in that kind of
your spouse. Yep. I totally agree. Yeah. Awesome. Guys, as we wrap up here, I got through all the questions I want to ask. Any other final thoughts, golden nuggets that we want to touch on before we wrap up here?
I've got a quick one, if I may.
You may.
I may. So tying in to what you've been talking about, Steve, with the family and friends and doing some of the house hacks with the kids, I think of some clients. They're great Envision Advisor house hackers that we've been working with over the years. They actually, and this can be another topic for another day, but they actually went out and bought houses for their parents with 5% down, minimum down, and it's totally allowable and works great. And the parent lived in the house as long as they can, and then eventually that turns into a house hack for them down the road. One of the properties is now a rental property, and they did it with 5%. They literally, like you were talking about buying 2 houses, they bought 2 houses with 5% down within a week of each other. They closed, and we underwrote, approved, and did them simultaneously and did the 2 loans. One was for the parent, and then one was for themselves personally. So there's some opportunity there with parents. So it's kids, but with the parents as well. And the parents don't necessarily have to really be great on the qualifying side, as long as they've got the good credit scores and whatnot to work with.
That's a great point. It doesn't have to work just one way. So there's multiple ways.
Adult children's helping their parents in that last phase. And I there's a few clients who have like that. They're really cool stories. Yeah. Where,
it's a win for everybody.
They grew up and the kids have, had successful careers, and I can help their families and help their parents as, as life changes. I love that so much.
Yeah.
Cool. Steve, Troy, thank you guys. Listeners out there, if you guys have any questions, Steve is an active investor. He lives in Northern Colorado. He's done some creative deals. As you've heard, connect with Steve. If you need help with lending, or actually if you're looking at like a 6 months or you're in advance, I would highly recommend you talk with Troy, regardless of how you're buying now or buying the future. Mm-hmm. Troy has done our clients right. So thank you guys so much. If there's any questions, reach out to us, and we'll be doing some more podcasts along creative ways to house hack. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.